How much better would your business look if you had 50 game-changing principles on how to be a better leader? On today's podcast, I had the pleasure of having on Simon Court, who is the founder of Value Partnership. This man knows how to dissect problems, how to make leaders even better within their sphere. This podcast is one that delves into his book, which I recommend you go look at. It's in the description, Founder's Legacy. Enjoy. As entrepreneurs, we all experience challenges in our business journey. I'm JT Story, and the Grappling Growth podcast is my attempt at documenting my entrepreneurial journey while building my brands. I sit down with fellow entrepreneurs, understanding how they grapple with growth. I hope you find value and enjoy. Simon, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Joe.
Simon, what does growth look like to you?
Okay, so because I'm a leadership coach and I'm also a founder, I guess I can answer that on two different levels. As a coach, I view growth as a mindset, really. And as a founder, I think I'd view it in terms of, for my business, in terms of growing the team, because growing the team drives revenue growth. And every business has to have its own definition of growth that suits the business model it has, right? So if you're in the mobile gaming business, it's probably average revenue per daily active user or something like that. Every business has its own critical metric. But I suppose the thing that I spend most of my time these days coaching and a growth mindset is the thing that powers founders to do amazing things. And it's a key differentiator between successful and less successful, not just founders, but people, I think.
And your definition, how has that evolved through your experiences?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I think a younger version of Simon would have just been keen to drive results, and I've been very like the kind of founders I find myself coaching these days. I think as I've got older and I've helped more and more CEOs and founders to become their best self, I've realised just how important it is. There's a kind of phrase, you need to work harder on yourself than you do on your business. I'm a great sort of believer in that. You've got to stretch yourself to learn new things. You've got to be open to new experiences. And I think if you do that, and if you take the view that you should focus on the things that you can change, not the things you can't. So there are all sorts of things that founders can't change. They can't change the inflation rate. The market shifts. Technology comes in. You know, all sorts of things can happen that are out of your control. But one thing you really can control is you. You can make yourself smarter. You can make yourself better educated. You can learn new skills. You can change your approach. So it is possibly the thing you have the most control over if you choose to focus on it and if you choose to work on yourself.
You touched upon a really interesting point where you said about founders working on themselves more than working on their businesses. That is something I 100% agree with. I think as a founder, what you're doing on the weekends, the way how you're sleeping, the way how you're recovering, these are all facets that combine into your business and make you a better performer. It's kind of like being an athlete for your business, and quite typically the founder is the most valuable player. So for you, is there a routine that you follow, or is there, before the routine, when did you realize that you need to prime yourself to be the best representative of your company and focus on how you channel your energy and what you do?
So I think from personal experience, when I set up my company and I effectively changed from working for somebody else to running my own business, and not just being a sole trader as I was in the early days of my consulting life and coaching career, and I started to employ people, build a team, and start having to take responsibility for not just myself, but the future of this practice I was building, it became really obvious to me that just continuing to behave and think the way I had been was simply no longer good enough. So I think when you collide with reality, especially if you're a founder, you either try to resist the learning and the experience that's confronting you, and you'll eventually fail, sadly, or you kind of embrace it and say, I've got to learn, I've got to figure out a different way of operating because this isn't working. A lot of the people I coach are meeting that moment where they realize that they need help. Either somebody's told them they need help, or they've had some feedback, or it's self-reflection, they're struggling and they just reach out for help, and they've talked to another founder perhaps who's worked with me or worked with another coach, and they think, that's a smart move for me in my career and my life right now. That's the beginning of a change, right? When you actually recognize this isn't working and I need to figure out a different way.
Mm-hmm. Talking about your book, Founder's Legacy, could you just scratch the surface a little bit more? Because one thing that really intrigued me was the words from Sir Clive Woodward, who you said is one of your friends, and I think you have an endorsement from someone like him that speaks volumes, and I was intrigued by what you're talking about, having 50 tactics, strategies to help, and essentially leadership lessons. Could you kind of give us an overview, a helicopter view of the book and the biggest lessons you learned from it?
Yeah, thank you. So a lot of people said to me, why do you wait so long to write this book? And I said, well, I wish I'd known this when I was younger. So it's taken me a while to accumulate and assimilate all of the knowledge I put in the book. And so the book is for founders who want to become leaders, who recognize that their business needs something different from their initial instincts, especially if they want it to scale and to really prosper. It's also for leaders who want to lead with a founder's mindset, because a lot of people in the corporate world are finding the current environment that we're all operating in chaotic, unpredictable, and very hard to navigate. And they need to approach leadership in a different way, I think. I think the old model is a bit broken. So I'm really keen for leaders of even mature businesses to change their mindset and approach to leadership as well, and to learn from founders. I think founders can teach sort of more mature corporate leaders a lot, and I think people in corporate life have something to teach founders as well. So that's sort of why I wrote it. And then in terms of what's in it, there are sort of three parts to it. As you rightly said, I divide it into 50 chapters. So it's 50 10-minute reads rather than 10, 30 or 40-minute reads, because founders are busy people, right? And they are often time poor and they like things to happen fast. So I've written it in bite-sized chunks, really. And the first bit is about you. The first sort of dozen chapters is about what it takes to be a founder. So I look at things like the growth mindset we've talked about. I look at things like humility, which is a surprisingly important quality for founders. I look at the traps that founders often fall into. Classic thing called the founder's trap. In the middle part of the book, I talk about the job.
The founder's trap.
The founder's trap. I didn't coin this expression, but the notion is that at a certain point, founders can become their own worst enemies. In other words, the very qualities that enabled them to successfully start a business, their creative energy, their game-changing mindset, their obsession with their solution to the world's problem that they've seen and identified, all of those amazing gifts that enabled them to get their business off and running can start to become the enemy of progress when the situation changes. And the situation does start to change when you have more people. Perhaps you have investors, you have more stakeholders in general, you have a larger team, and you need different qualities to be successful. And if the founder doesn't adapt to the challenges the business faces in the new phase, they'll run into difficulties. And it's called the founder's trap. And there's a bit of research on it. You'll find that the original research showed that founders who wanted to maximize their financial returns were more likely to do that by selling than by staying in control. And my argument in the book, in a way, is to say that's not necessarily the case. If a founder has a growth mindset and they learn to lead well, they can carry on running their own business. And I cover some stories in the book of people who did exactly that. And as a consequence, the business benefits from their founder mindset long into the life of the business, rather than in the relatively short-lived early stages of the life of the business. I think that's a big advantage, because nobody cares more about the mission of the business than the founder.
And as a founder, say because I've experienced this personally, you're spinning your wheels, you're not too sure what avenue to go down, what's working well, you just feel a bit tired really of the business. What would you say personally, from your research, your investigation, a founder could do to step back and really think, how do I realign my mission so we can look at the vision for the future?
So there's a whole bunch of different things you can do, I think, when you get to that phase, or when you get into that state. I mean, I think, as I write about a lot in the book, being a founder is an unbelievably difficult thing to pull off. I mean, the failure rate, which I talk about, is very high. Over the long term, it's about 90%. Most businesses die. I think you lose about 20% in year one. So you have to be a bit masochistic to be a founder in the first place, because I'm very optimistic as well, because your chances of failure are much higher than your chances of success. So I think there are moments when probably you feel lower because you lose a big contract, or a key member of your team leaves, or a longed for investment simply doesn't happen. They don't sign the documents or whatever. And I think in moments like that, one of the most important things you can do to kind of look after yourself is to have somebody to talk to. It does not have to be, I hasten to add, this isn't a marketing campaign for coaching or my coaching. It doesn't have to be a coach. It could be your mentor. It could be your partner. It could be somebody else, an experienced founder, or even a network of founders who have gone through this experience themselves, and they can help you to level out and talk about what's going on. I'm actually coaching somebody right now who's very successful founder. It's his third business that I'm giving him some support with. He goes through a pretty tough time because he's worried about having to go through another funding round, and is in that sort of critical stage that if he doesn't have a good seasonal sales performance throughout the Christmas period, they might have to raise money again, and he's concerned about the ability to raise money again. He's hoping he can get through this and get to a point where the business is profitable and he doesn't need other people's money anymore. So that moment is causing him some sleepless nights. And what I tend to do is kind of work on two levels. One is looking at his sort of habits and how he's managing his energy and taking care of himself to make sure that he can sleep well, he's exercising well, he's eating well, he's looking after his family and his spirit. But in a way that that's not enough. The other thing I do is ask him to get underneath what's really worrying him. Because there's this big picture worry, will I need to raise money again? But when you dig into that, you find interesting things. Like one of the issues he was concerned about was what to do about a key member of his team and whether or not he needed to replace them or not. And he was sitting on a decision and fretting about it. And so sometimes the thing to do is to kind of expose what those issues are that are really causing you that sort of unease and make some decisions about them, so you can move on. You don't get all your decisions right as a founder. In fact, you're doing quite well if you get more than 50% right, in my experience. But I think for a lot of people, making a decision, even if you might get some wrong, is a lot better than prevaricating and putting it off and living with the uncertainty of what to do.
You say, and I wholeheartedly agree with that, I think most entrepreneurs, and I look at people in two camps, unsuccessful, successful entrepreneurs, and I think running the type of business that I do, I've worked with an array of people who I can easily branch in to one of those two categories. But the most successful people that I've looked at, they work with speed. They understand that, as you said, and I think it was Barack Obama who said, I just need to be right just over 50% of the time to make things work. And there's a lot of people who, they ruminate on decisions. They say, I'm going to do this in 12 months' time. The timing's not right. They just don't make decisions. Then their business just plateaus. There's no growth. There's no progression. And I really like the concept of revolving doors.
Yeah.
If there's an idea or a problem that we need to address, is this a revolving door? What can we do to give us... And business, a lot of the time, is a gamble on probability. If we release this new product, there's no guarantee it's going to work. You can do your best to gather market research, use quantitative data to go out and hypothesize if something is going to work. But until you go out and make the sales, you'll never know. But most people spend too much time yearning in the planning stage, nothing gets done, and then it sort of becomes this negative ball of momentum that starts going down the hill, that you try to catch something that's it's just going backwards on a decline. It's going to get faster and faster, it's going to get heavier based off of physics, and then trying to catch that's it. And it's like I know in the financial world, with financial markets, they use the concept of catching a falling knife. You just don't catch it. You just leave it, let it do its thing, ride out that loss, cut it as it is there. Mm-hmm. And I think we're creatures where we really delve into the sunk cost fallacy, and there's tons of economic concepts there of people chasing losses as opposed to looking for those gains.
So I think it was Jeff Bezos who gave us this idea of type 1, type 2 decisions, the sort of one-way doors and two-way doors, or revolving doors, whatever you want to call the doors. I think he's spot on. I mean, and what's interesting about a company like Amazon is that, when he started in his garage, it was, I'm going to create the world's biggest bookstore, and now his company's worth trillions of dollars. But it's still innovative. It's still inventing new businesses. It's still moving at pace. And that is really the founder's mindset, continuing to add value in the business context, I think. Most companies the size of Amazon are much slower and much more bureaucratic. But he's still got that founder's mentality alive and well inside the business. I mean, I think this is a struggle for people from a management background, because most people who run today's business are focused on optimizing, working on delivering results with today's business model. But what founders are constantly doing is trying to reinvent their business. They're trying to improve it and refine it. And as you say, most decisions, if you actually look at them, are not one-way doors. They're revolving doors. You can take that decision and it's probably reversible. If it doesn't work, change it. And we, learn, fail, try again. And that's something founders generally do quite well. And finding your courage to make decisions like that and move at pace is, I think, one of the keys to success in this world.
One of my coaches, he said something really good. He said, I see this, and he's massively successful. But he said, he asked someone, okay, how long will it take you to find out the feedback from this test you're looking to take? The guy said, okay, 2 weeks. He's like, okay, so how long have you not pulled the trigger on it for? And I was like, I don't know, I've been debating this for the last 4 weeks. So he's like, wait, let's just get this straight. If you did this test 4 weeks ago, you would have found out 2 weeks ago if it was successful or not. And the guy was like, yeah. He's like, well, that's your answer. And that's the thing with so many things within business. We wait, we hold off, we wait for perfection, which is never going to come. There's always something that could be improved. And it's just getting 100%. Done before whenever. And I think there's so many armchair entrepreneurs or people out there who talk about these concepts, but when I say these points, 99% of the time, I talk from my own experience of being stuck in my head and not pulling the trigger and not making decisions. And then it's only when you zoom out that you look and you realize this didn't happen. And I think with business, and you know this better than I do, there's a lag effect to every action you make today. You will turn around, run an advertising campaign today, chances are you're not going to see a return immediately. It's when you're able to zoom out, reflect on what's happened, hiring an employee. You bring a new team member in, you're not expecting them to deliver results within the first month. It might take 6 months to achieve, but people are impatient when it comes down to, I think it comes back to prospect theory of we've got risk aversion versus loss aversion. We're too afraid. And maybe this is really a British thing, and I'd love to get your insight and opinion on this if you see this is different with other markets. But if we look at prospect fear in a whole, the concept of loss aversion, it is too heavily sunk into our psyche versus the risk aversion of this does pay off, then what's the upside gain? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think I don't think the British or any sort of culture is necessarily better or worse. I've met people from so many different cultural backgrounds and worked with many. And there might be some broad brush truth to it, but on an individual level, I've just met all sorts from everywhere. And I don't think there's any real qualification for being a great founder that starts with being Californian, male and 25, for example. I mean, I'm coaching a young British man who's in his early 20s, and he's currently in Silicon Valley, actually, but he's educated here. He's building a spectacular AI business. He's got no problem with speed or risk. I actually think one of the biggest problems that gets in the way of taking risk is people who've had a relatively privileged life struggle with risk because they actually benefit from life being relatively comfortable around them. And if they do take risk, it's probably with somebody else's money. and when I mean, especially with young people who might have had a gritty start in life, they're unbelievably hardworking. They are brave, and they have a huge desire to make their way in the world and prove themselves, and it's that hunger that gives them resilience and often leads to better outcomes. I just started a conversation with a young Afghan boy. I should call him a man, really, but it's sort of he's on the he's on the cusp of becoming a man. He's so young and he's so hungry for
How old is
success. He's 20. And I know, he's technically an adult, but we don't actually become adults till about 25. And when I talk about men, I think it's about 65. He's but he's just so keen to prove himself. And I think often founders, if you look at whether it's in the United States or in the UK or in Europe, some of the most successful businesses are not led by people who had incredibly privileged backgrounds. They're led by people who are often immigrants, and they often had to work really hard to get what they wanted. Or they're dyslexic, like Richard Branson, or one of my sort of heroes in the book, Rob Smalley, founded MiniClip, and he's dyslexic. I mean, his dyslexia is what made him reject formal education and decide that he's going to do his own thing. And that drove him.
Yeah, there's a term known throughout fighters of the immigrant mentality of being, you've come from a developing nation, you've been thrown wherever you're in, and you've just got that mentality to push forward, succeed. You're resilient, persistent, dedicated. You don't take no for an answer. And I think it's maybe a case of where you haven't got much to lose, that the upside gain is just that much sweeter, and you're not coming from a place of silk sheets and fearful of, well, I don't want to lose. If you've got nothing to lose, then you're willing to take bigger swings and bigger punts and put those hours in, because there's not much to go back to. And I don't say that from a place of, I grew up with hard surroundings. I grew up in a very, in my opinion, privileged position. By no means was I in a place where I had, to be fair, I had all of my basic needs met, and I'm so grateful to my parents for that. But there was still so many wrongs that I could look at, and I could see years and periods where my parents really struggled, but they always found ways to put food on mine and my siblings' plates, first and foremost.
Needs must.
Seeing that for me, that's it. Seeing that for me is really, I'd like to think it has made me a driven person and lit a fire in my stomach at least to think, how can I give back to them, and how can I ensure that I can give the best possible life to not just my children, but those around me, and elevate people there.
So, because I went through a lot of formal education, overeducated, really, sort of like 2 master's degrees. I was trained to think about problems and to analyze them, to get the data, trained to think like a scientist, right? And I think when you find yourself trying to run a business and be an entrepreneur, you have to put aside some of that, because you can't wait for all the information. It is an illusion. You can't wait for everyone to agree. It's better you surround yourself with good people and talk to them about what we should do. And most decisions for founders, I think, are a judgment call. You get the best data you can, and then you just make a judgment call. And you'll get a lot of them wrong, but if you surround yourself with good people and you listen, you've got a chance of getting some of the big ones right.
Absolutely. I've got a question to you, Simon. You mentioned this Afghani boy, 20 years old.
Yeah.
What's the number one golden rule for life that you'd give to him, if he was listening right now?
There's loads, but I'll pick one which I think is probably something I learned a bit too late, but I have learned it and I do practice it, and that is to invest in relationships with others and to be really generous in those relationships. So don't ever go into a relationship thinking of, what can I get from this person? you go into a relationship with a generous heart and you say, who is this person? What's their story? What can I learn from them, and what can I offer them? And that, ever since I started operating like that, I've been a nicer person, a bit less self-centered, and I have found myself surrounded by people who not only I have helped, but want to help me with what I'm doing. So it's that generosity, I think, towards others that really sets you up for life. And so one of the things that my young friend and I are doing is working out who he should collaborate with, who he needs to meet. Because a lot of our life is about our connections with other people. I mean, the number one source of our happiness is being in a partnership with a long-term person that we love, of whichever gender. Mm-hmm. And we know that from it is the most important thing. It beats diet, it beats exercise. It is number one. And then number two, not far behind, is having a supportive network of family and friends. And those people, invest in those people, invest in those relationships. Don't treat them casually. Don't value them as if they're a side issue for you because you're so hell-bent on your own agenda. And I don't think as a young man I did that enough.
Simon, so I'm curious about the point you just mentioned there. And this is a two-pronged question. So at what age did that inflection point happen? And if you don't mind sharing, what was the spark that made you question the way how you value relationships?
Probably around 30, mid 30 to 35, somewhere in that window. And the spark is a who, not a what. I met my wife at that point, and she is one of the most generous, and she's everybody's second mother these days. She literally looks after everyone around her with such generosity and such love. I feel like I'm in a Hollywood movie watching somebody perform miracles on a daily basis, and I think that started to change me, living with her, seeing the way she treated others, at first being slightly stunned by it, and then after a while starting to think, oh, this is such a good way to be and such a good way to live. And then we had our own child, and being a dad changes you too. I don't know whether it's the same for sons, but being a dad to a daughter is like feels like a huge responsibility to protect her and to help her to grow up to be strong and brave and smart. And so, suddenly you're not as important. You've got this little human who's more important to you than anything else in the world. So I think family life changed me, and then business life started to change as well as a consequence of that.
Useful. Simon, final question. What message do you have for people today?
Well, for founders, I would say learn how to be a good CEO, learn how to be a good leader, because the underlying reason why so many businesses struggle and eventually fail is because the founders don't learn to lead. And most of the reported reasons why founders say their business failed, whether they didn't find product market fit, or they ran out of cash, or they got out-competed, or their founding team broke up, behind them are a mindset and a pattern of behavior that was never likely to succeed. And that is the reason I wrote the book. So if you're a founder, I'd really recommend that you take a whole new look at leadership and think about, how can I become better and stronger as a CEO and as a leader? If there's anybody else listening, I would encourage you to follow my wife's lead and be kind and generous to the people around you. We even adopted generosity as one of the values of our company, because I think we found that the more generous we were with our clients, and I don't mean giving things away for free. That's the way you don't want to interpret it. But actually, just being generous and human transforms your relationships and leads to better business results, in my experience too.
That's such a powerful message to end on. Simon, thank you.
You're welcome. Good chatting with you.